Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we step into the fetid, suffocating air of the 1540s and into the very bedchamber of a dying king. Imagine, for a moment, that you are not here in your cosy bed, but you are a silent servant, a ghost in the corners of Hampton Court Palace. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, medicinal herbs and something else. A sickeningly sweet, putrid aroma that hangs in the air like a shroud. You're about to spend the last agonising weeks with Henry VIII, a man who for all his power is now a prisoner in his own colossal body. You probably won't survive this, but we'll do our best to get you through it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the heart of the palace, a place once synonymous with lavish feasts, raucous jousts, and the vibrant life of a young athletic king. Now, the palace feels less like a home and more like a mausoleum in waiting. The silence is punctuated by the laboured breathing of the man who ruled England with an iron fist for almost 4 decades. King Henry VIII, the great lion of England, is a man in ruins. As you navigate the winding corridors, you notice that the courtiers move with a strange, unnatural purpose, their footsteps hushed, their eyes darting about as if constantly watching for an unseen enemy. This isn't just about a sick king. It's about the very future of the kingdom, and every glance, every whisper, every gesture is a calculated move in a deadly game of chess. Henry's decline wasn't a sudden, dramatic fall. It was a slow, deliberate rot that had been setting in for years. The once broad-shouldered, 6 feet 2 inches monarch, famous for his prowess on the tournament field, is now a swollen, immobile mass. His frame, once praised for its muscularity, has ballooned to an estimated weight of over 300 pounds. You can see it in the way his custom-built chairs groan under his weight, and in the way his servants must struggle to move him from his bed to his wheeled chair. The once feared monarch is now a burden, and in a court where strength is everything, this weakness is a dangerous vulnerability. Historians still argue whether his obesity was the result of a jousting accident in 1536, which prevented him from exercising and caused a hormonal imbalance, or simply the natural progression of a man who lived a life of unchecked gluttony. The physical decay is the most obvious sign, but the political decay is what truly makes the air crackle with tension. Henry's heir, the boy Prince Edward, is a mere 9 years old. This is the ultimate danger for a monarchy. A child on the throne is a beacon for regents, power brokers, and opportunistic courtiers. You can almost feel the factions forming. On one side, the ambitious Seymour family, led by Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour. On the other, the conservative Howards, still smarting from the executions of 2 of their own, Catherine Howard and her father, the Duke of Norfolk's son. You can't help but notice the quiet, sidelong glances they exchange, the way their conversations stop the moment you come within earshot. It's an atmosphere thick with paranoia and unspoken threats. Everyone is a suspect, and everyone is a potential conspirator. The core of Henry's suffering, and the source of that awful smell, is the ulcer on his leg. It's a wound that has festered for years, never properly healing. It's an ulcer that first appeared after a jousting injury, but that was exacerbated by Henry's sedentary lifestyle and poor diet. The wound is an open, weeping sore, and the medical knowledge of the time is laughably inadequate to deal with it. They apply poultices of honey, wine, and various herbs, but all it seems to do is create a more pleasant-smelling cesspool. The stench of it is so profound that even in his spacious bedchamber the air feels heavy and unbreathable. You see servants discreetly holding scented handkerchiefs to their faces, though they pretend to be wiping their brows. It's a pathetic, humanising detail for a man who demanded absolute godlike deference. Adding to the misery is a condition that medieval doctors called the sweat, or the ague, but which we now recognise as severe recurring fevers. The king's body, already weakened by the leg ulcer and obesity, is struggling to fight off infection. You see him shivering uncontrollably one moment, his teeth chattering, and then sweating profusely the next, his face slick with a clammy sheen. The cycle repeats itself, draining his energy and his will to rule. The once booming voice that commanded armies and dictated religious reformation is now a weak, raspy whisper. He speaks in short, breathless sentences, and his face, once a portrait of regal power, is now a puffy, pale mask of pain and exhaustion. It's a strange thing, this glimpse into the king's final moments. This is not the Henry of the history books, the one who founded the Church of England, the one who executed 2 of his wives. This is just a man, sick and in pain, his body betraying him. He is a victim of his own excesses, his own arrogance, and the limitations of his era's medical knowledge. The court, for all its pomp and splendour, is just a gilded cage, and the king is the animal trapped within it, slowly dying. You watch as a servant carefully brings him a bowl of broth, the only thing he can stomach on this particular day, and you feel a strange sense of pity for the man. The pity is fleeting, of course. You remember the stories of his cruelty, his paranoia, his willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way. But in this moment, all that seems to have melted away, leaving behind only a shell of a man, consumed by his own mortality. The Queen, Catherine Parr, hovers nearby with a quiet, watchful intensity. She's the last of his 6 wives, a survivor who has managed to navigate the treacherous currents of the court. She's a fascinating figure in her own right, a woman who is both a devoted wife and a shrewd political player. She manages the king's household, tends to his needs, and tries to keep the peace between the warring factions of the court. You see her speaking to the young Prince Edward, her voice soft and reassuring, a stark contrast to the whispered conspiracies taking place in the palace's darker corners. The political tension is palpable. The question isn't if the king will die, but when. And when he does, the whole kingdom will hold its breath. This isn't a peaceful passing, it's a storm gathering on the horizon. The smell of decay isn't just coming from the king's leg, it's coming from the very foundation of his rule, a rule that's about to crumble and give way to something new, something uncertain, and something that may just be more dangerous than the old king himself. The stench is a physical presence, a thick, suffocating blanket that follows you wherever you go within the king's private apartments. It's not just the smell of decay, but a composite of many things: old blood, pus, medicinal herbs, and the musty, unchanged air of a room where a man has been confined for months. As you tiptoe through the royal antechamber, the smell seems to emanate from the very walls, a ghost of Henry's physical decline. The source, of course, is his leg. The ulcer, once a mere wound, has evolved into a monstrous weeping sore. You see it when a servant, with a grimace of pure disgust that he quickly hides, changes the bandages. The bandages are thick, stained a horrifying mix of brown and black, and the servant works quickly, almost violently, as if to get the repulsive task over with as soon as possible. The flesh around the wound is a sickly grey, and in places it has blackened entirely. This, you realise with a shiver, is the first stage of gangrene, a medieval death sentence. The ulcer is a constant grinding agony for the king. It's not just a physical wound, it's a source of constant low-grade torture. The pain is so intense that even the strongest opiates and herbal remedies of the time can barely touch it. You can see it in his face, a mask of perpetual discomfort, his jaw clenched, his eyes squeezed shut at times as a sharp pang of pain shoots up his leg. It's a fascinating and tragic reversal of fortune. This man, who once wielded absolute power, who could order the death of anyone with a flick of his wrist, is now utterly powerless against the slow, inexorable decay of his own flesh. It's a bitter, ironic punishment for a king who believed himself to be God's chosen ruler. And then there's the phantom pain. As you watch him, you see him sometimes flinch or cry out, not just from the ulcer itself, but from a different, more mysterious torment. His mind, you realise, is playing tricks on him. The nerves, damaged and dying, are sending erratic signals to his brain, creating sensations of excruciating pain in parts of the leg that are no longer even truly alive. Historians still argue whether Henry was aware that this pain was not real, or if he believed the phantom pain to be a new and more insidious form of suffering. He will sometimes demand that a servant touch a part of his leg where there is no visible wound, claiming it is burning or being pricked by needles. It's a sign that his mind, like his body, is beginning to fail him, and that the boundaries between reality and hallucination are blurring. The king's physical decay is a direct reflection of the decay of his absolute authority. Once, his very presence commanded silence and submission. Now, his groans and whispers are a constant reminder of his weakness. The power that once resided in his voice and his intimidating physical presence has now been siphoned away. flowing into the hands of the ambitious courtiers and privy councillors who circle him like vultures. They consult with doctors, issue proclamations in his name, and make decisions that he can no longer effectively oversee. You see the subtle shift in their demeanour. They still show deference, of course. To do otherwise would be an act of suicide. But there is an edge to it, a barely concealed impatience and a quiet anticipation. They are waiting for the inevitable, and they are already planning for the world that will exist after he is gone. The court's response to the king's illness is a microcosm of the political drama unfolding. There are two primary factions, as we touched on before, the Seymours, led by the astute and ambitious Edward Seymour, the Earl of Hertford. He is the brother of Jane Seymour, Henry's beloved third wife, and the mother of his only legitimate son, Prince Edward. This relationship gives him immense leverage, and you see him constantly in the boy's presence, subtly moulding him and positioning himself as the future power behind the throne. Then there are the Conservatives, led by Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk. They are traditionalists, suspicious of the Protestant leanings of the Seymours and wary of the changes that a young Protestant king might bring. These two men and their allies represent the two competing visions for England's future, and they are engaged in a deadly silent battle for control. This battle is not fought with swords, but with whispers, with carefully crafted alliances, and with the manipulation of the dying king. A quirky or fringe tidbit of the time is the use of astrology in court politics. Many of the courtiers had their personal astrologers who would cast charts and interpret celestial signs to predict the king's death. You see them huddle in quiet corners, sharing notes and comparing charts, their faces a mix of professional calculation and genuine nervous belief. It's a strange blend of medieval superstition and the nascent science of the era, and it shows you how desperate these men were for any advantage, for any shred of knowledge that might give them a leg up on their rivals. The king, for his part, is increasingly isolated. His illness makes him irritable, and his paranoia, a defining trait of his reign, is at an all-time high. He trusts no one, and he is prone to violent, unpredictable outbursts of rage. A servant who makes a small mistake, a doctor who offers a prognosis he doesn't like, both are met with a torrent of shouted insults and threats of imprisonment. These outbursts, a mainstream historical fact, have the effect of pushing away those who might have genuinely cared for him. The Queen, Catherine Parr, is one of the few who can approach him with any degree of calm. She has a preternatural ability to soothe his temper, to read his moods, and to give him the comfort he so desperately craves. She is the fragile bridge between the dying king and the kingdom he once ruled with such vigour. But even she is not immune to the dangers of his paranoia. Not long ago, as a light-hearted aside, she found herself in hot water when she dared debate theology with the king, who, even in his diminished state, considered himself the supreme theological authority in England. A powerful faction, led by Stephen Gardiner, the Conservative Bishop of Winchester, used this to plot her downfall, convincing the king to sign a warrant for her arrest. Only through a combination of luck and her shrewd political manoeuvring did she manage to survive, reminding you that even the most benign interactions with the king could be a matter of life and death. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we heard about in a different story? Well, this court is even more dangerous than that. The decay of his leg and the increasing paranoia of his mind are two sides of the same coin. The physical rot is feeding his mental anguish, and the mental anguish is preventing him from making sound judgments. The once great lion is now a wounded, cornered beast, lashing out at anyone who comes too close. The smell of decay, you now realise, is not just a physical phenomenon. It is a metaphor for the entire court, a place where ambition, fear, and betrayal are festering in the shadows, waiting for the final gruesome moment when the king finally breathes his last. The end is near, and you can almost feel the entire country holding its breath. The king's leg, a symbol of his physical torment, is now also the central symbol of the kingdom's impending crisis. The stench is a constant companion, a heavy, sickly sweet perfume of mortality that follows you from the king's bedchamber to the far reaches of the palace. But as you move away from the immediate presence of the dying king, you begin to notice other things, other undercurrents of the court. The atmosphere isn't just thick with the smell of Henry's rotting leg, it's thick with something far more dangerous, the unspoken ambitions of the powerful men and women who surround him. The air crackles with the silent language of power, a language of knowing glances, hushed conversations, and carefully choreographed movements. The game of succession is in full swing, and the pawns are not just courtiers, but the unseen heirs themselves. You're watching a power struggle unfold, and the central figures in this drama are not the adult politicians, but 3 children. First, there is Prince Edward, a delicate, intelligent boy of 9 years. He's the great prize, the living embodiment of the Tudor dynasty. He is Henry's only legitimate son, and his very existence is a testament to the decades of political and personal turmoil Henry endured to secure a male heir. Edward is constantly watched, constantly protected, and constantly used as a political tool. You see him in the palace gardens, a small pale figure surrounded by a cohort of tutors and guards. The boy, you notice, has an old soul. He is serious and bookish, far more interested in his studies and the nascent Protestant theology of his tutors than in the boisterous activities of his father's youth. He is a king in waiting, and everyone knows it. Then there are his half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth. They are a fascinating pair, each a product of their mother's tragic fates. Mary, the eldest, is in her late 20s, a staunch Catholic and the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. She's a woman of unwavering faith and immense personal pride, and she resents her father's reformation, which declared her illegitimate. You see her moving through the court, her face a mask of quiet defiance. The Catholic faction, led by the Duke of Norfolk, sees her as their hope for a return to the old religion. They whisper in her ear, reminding her of her rightful place, and encouraging her to stand firm against the encroaching Protestant forces. She is a symbol of the past, and her presence is a constant, quiet challenge to Henry's religious reforms. Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, is a bright, fiery teenager, around 13 years old at this time. She's a fascinating blend of her parents. She has her father's red hair and quick wit, and a touch of her mother's sharp intellect and political savvy. Like Mary, she was declared illegitimate by Henry after her mother's execution, but unlike Mary, she is willing to be pragmatic about it. She lives in the shadow of her mother's scandalous end, but she also carries the legacy of Anne's fierce determination. The Protestant faction, led by the Seymours, sees in her a potential second in line, a clever and ambitious figure who could be a valuable ally if their plans for Edward go awry. She is a symbol of a more uncertain modern future. The political tensions are centred around these 3 children, but they are driven by the adults who see them as chess pieces. The key players are jockeying for control of the Regency Council that will rule in Edward's name after Henry's death. You see the Duke of Norfolk, an ageing and calculating man, speaking in hushed tones with his allies. He represents the old guard, the aristocracy, the tradition of the Catholic Church. He is a man who has seen it all, and he is determined to protect the ancient institutions of the kingdom from what he sees as the dangerous, heretical ideas of the reformers. He has much to lose, especially since his family, the Howards, has been so close to the king's executioner's block, a mainstream historical fact. On the other side is Edward Seymour, the Earl of Hertford. He is younger, more dynamic, and he has a powerful trump card. He is Prince Edward's uncle. He is a shrewd and ambitious man, a true product of the new age of Reformation politics. He is not a man of ancient lineage, but a man who has risen through his own talent and ambition. He sees a world of opportunity in the coming regency, a chance to consolidate power and push England further down the path of Protestantism. You see him constantly in the company of the prince, subtly reinforcing his own position and making sure that he is seen as the boy's closest confidant. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the intense scrutiny given to the prince's health. While his father is dying of a festering leg ulcer and various other ailments, the court is obsessed with protecting the young heir from even the slightest cold. You see his food being tasted by a taster, his clothes carefully monitored for dampness, and his every activity planned to ensure he is not overexerting himself. It is a strange contrast. A king who gorges himself to death, and a prince whose every morsel is scrutinised and every step is guided. It's a testament to how fragile the Tudor dynasty was seen to be and how desperate they were to protect their future. Historians still argue whether Henry's will, which would eventually determine the succession, was truly his own work or if it was heavily manipulated by the faction surrounding him. The fact that the will was changed in the final days of his life and that the names of the councillors were altered suggests a deep level of political manoeuvring. You see the royal lawyers and scribes in the palace, their faces tired and their expressions guarded. They are doing the dirty work of power, transcribing a document that will shape the fate of England for centuries to come, all while trying to decipher the incoherent mumblings of a dying monarch and the pointed suggestions of the men who surround him. The court is a microcosm of the kingdom's divisions. On one side, the Conservatives, who fear the chaos of a Protestant future and the social upheaval that it might bring. On the other, the Reformers, who see a chance to remake England in their own image, to cast off the superstitions of the past and embrace a new, more godly future. The children, Edward, Mary and Elizabeth, are caught in the middle, each a symbol of a different path. You watch them, these three vulnerable figures, and you see not just the future of a family but the future of a nation. And all the while the king's health continues to decline, the whispers become more audacious, the planning more overt. The silent battle for the throne is now a full-throated roar, a cacophony of ambition and fear that drowns out the quiet groans of the man who, for so long, held all their fates in his hands. It's a sad and ignoble end for a man who once commanded the world stage. He is no longer a player in the game, he is the game itself, a dying prize for the most cunning and ruthless of his courtiers. The rotting stench of his leg is more than just a physical reality. It is a metaphor for the rotten core of his court, a place where all loyalty and honour have been replaced by a desperate, all-consuming scramble for power. The air in the palace is a mixture of decay and a certain antiseptic sharpness, a futile attempt to mask the reality of the king's condition. This other smell, you realise, comes from the endless parade of remedies and concoctions being applied to the king's leg, and from the presence of a new kind of power player in the court, the doctors. They are not mere servants, but figures of immense influence, holding the keys to the kingdom's future in their shaky, ointment-stained hands. The most prominent among them, and the one whose every word is hung on by the anxious courtiers, is Dr. William Butts. He is not just a physician, he is the king's confidant, a man who has direct access to the king's private thoughts and who can influence the most critical decisions. You see him moving through the palace, his face a mask of professional concern and utter exhaustion, for the king's demands on his time are relentless. Dr. Butts is a fascinating character. He is a Cambridge-educated man, a pioneer of his time, but he is still operating within the medieval framework of medicine. His work is a blend of the surprisingly modern and the hilariously antiquated. He believes in the importance of a clean environment and a balanced diet, a mainstream historical fact. But his remedies for the king's suffering are a bizarre mix of herbal lore, rudimentary surgery, and spiritual guidance. He's caught between two worlds, the nascent scientific revolution and the entrenched traditions of the past. The other physicians in the court are a mix of skilled surgeons, apothecaries and quacks, but it is Butts who has the king's ear, and his status gives him a terrifying amount of political power. You see, Doctor. Butts huddled with the Privy Council, his reports on the king's health, the most important intelligence the men can receive. His words are not just about a man's pulse and temperature, they are about the stability of the kingdom. A good day means a little more time to consolidate power. A bad day means a frantic scramble to finish plans before the inevitable end. The political factions, the Seymours and the Howards, are both trying to gain his favour, offering him gifts and subtle promises of future power. Butts, for his part, is playing a delicate, dangerous game. He knows that if he gives a wrong diagnosis, or if he is seen as favouring one side, he could end up on the scaffold himself. His face is a testament to this stress, etched with the kind of worry that only comes from knowing you are holding the fate of an entire nation in your hands. The medical treatments themselves are a source of both hope and horror. For the king's leg, the doctors attempt to clean the wound with wine and apply poultices made of honey and herbs. Honey, a quirky or fringe tidbit of the time, was believed to have antiseptic properties, and it was used extensively in medieval medicine. The pain, however, is a different matter. To deal with the agonising throbbing, the doctors administer a potion made from a mixture of opium, henbane, and other herbs. It's a powerful sedative, but the side effects are severe. You see the king in a stupor, his words slurred and his mind foggy. When the potion wears off, the pain returns with a vengeance, making him even more irritable and difficult to deal with. It's a vicious cycle of pain and drugged numbness, and it is slowly but surely destroying what little mental acuity the king has left. Dr. Butts's medical knowledge is far from perfect, but he does possess a certain level of pragmatism. He understands that the king's obesity and lack of exercise are the root cause of many of his problems, but he is powerless to do anything about it. He cannot, after all, tell the King of England to go for a run or to stop eating a steady diet of rich meats and sweet pastries. To do so would be an act of professional suicide. Instead, he focuses on managing the symptoms, a futile task. The king's blood pressure is likely through the roof, a condition the doctors of the time had no name for, and it is a ticking time bomb. The fevers, too, are a constant problem, and the doctors attribute them to a build-up of bad humours in the body, a central belief of medieval medicine. To counter this, they perform small bloodlettings, a practice that we now know only served to weaken the king even further. The sheer absurdity of the medical situation is almost comical. Imagine a group of grown men, educated at the finest universities in Europe, trying to cure a man with advanced gangrene by rubbing herbs on his leg and letting his blood out with leeches. It's a tragicomedy, a dance of desperation and futility. Historians still argue whether the doctors genuinely believed their remedies were working, or if they were simply going through the motions, trying to placate a dying tyrant and save their own skins. Given the political climate of the court, the latter is a distinct possibility. They were not just doctors, they were political operatives, and their primary goal may have been survival, not a cure. And the king himself, in his moments of clarity, is a man torn between the old ways and the new. He believes in the power of his doctors and the remedies they provide, but he is also a man of deep superstition. He has his personal alchemists and mystics, men who offer him promises of magical cures and eternal life. You see him sometimes speaking to them in hushed tones, his voice a desperate whisper. They promise him that a certain elixir, made from rare herbs and powdered unicorn horn, a joke, of course, there were no unicorns, will cure his ailments. The king, a man who built a new church to get his way, is now falling back on the most ancient and unproven remedies, a desperate man clinging to any hope he can find. Dr. Butts, for all his professional distance, is a man of genuine compassion. You see him sometimes in quiet moments, watching the king with a look of profound sadness in his eyes. He is a doctor, but he is also a human being, and he is watching a man, a great king, die a slow, agonizing and undignified death. He is a silent witness to the end of an era, and he knows it. His reports to the council are professional and detached, but his face tells a different story. He knows that all his science, all his knowledge, is useless against the inevitable. The king is dying, and there is nothing he or anyone else can do about it. The medical theatre, the poultices, the potions, they're all just a distraction, a way of giving the court the illusion of control while the king's body, and the kingdom itself, continues its slow, inexorable decay. The doctor, the purveyor of hope, is now a silent messenger of death. The air in the palace is no longer just heavy with the stench of decay and the antiseptic smell of medieval medicine. There's a third aroma, a rich, cloying mix of roast meat, sweet wine, and exotic spices. It's the smell of a king's final feast, a grotesque culinary spectacle that plays out every day in the royal apartments. You watch as servants, their faces impassive, carry in tray after tray of food, a testament to a man's unchecked gluttony and a macabre counterpoint to his wasting body. This is the king's final act of defiance, a daily ritual where he attempts to reassert his power over his own failing body by consuming everything in sight. Henry's diet in his final weeks is a historical fact, and it's a study in excess. Despite the advice of Dr. Butts and his other physicians, who begged him to eat more moderately, the king refused to change his ways. He was, after all, the king, and no one, not even a doctor, could tell him what to do. His meals are a reflection of his own personal history, a mix of the medieval and the newly fashionable. You see platters of roasted venison and boar, meats that would have been the staples of a great feast in his younger, more athletic days. But you also see dishes with sugar and spices from the New World, a testament to the changing tastes of the Tudor court. The food is rich, fatty, and utterly unsuited for a man with his debilitating health issues. The king's favourite dessert is a creamy concoction of sweetened milk and spices, a kind of early custard or rice pudding. He consumes it in staggering quantities, the sugar and fat only exacerbating his gout and his weight problems. You see him sometimes, with a kind of childlike greed in his eyes, demanding another bowl, his voice a hoarse whisper. The servants, powerless to refuse, bring him what he wants, their faces a mixture of pity and revulsion. He is a man eating himself to death, and everyone around him is a silent witness to this slow-motion suicide. The contrast with the careful, almost austere diets of the younger courtiers is striking. You see Prince Edward, for example, eating a carefully prepared meal of boiled chicken and vegetables, a stark reminder of the future king's careful upbringing. The food, however, is not just a source of sustenance, it is a political tool. The factions vying for power are constantly trying to gain favour with the king by bringing him delicacies and rare foods. The Seymours might bring him a rare bird from a far-off land, a symbol of their progressive and worldly outlook. The Howards, on the other hand, might bring him a roast from a stag killed on one of their estates, a symbol of their traditional aristocratic roots. Each dish is a message, a subtle way of reminding the king who their loyalties lie with. The king, in his fog of pain and opium, may not even notice, but the courtiers certainly do. They watch each other's offerings with a hawk-like intensity, each gift a score in the silent game of power. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the use of manchet bread in the king's diet. This was a type of finely sifted white bread, baked specifically for the royal table. It was seen as a luxury and a status symbol, as the common folk would eat coarse, dark bread. The irony, of course, is that the coarse bread, with its higher fibre content, would have been far healthier for the king than the refined, easy-to-eat manchet. But for Henry, food was not just about nutrition. It was about power and status. He was the king, and he would eat the best even if it was slowly killing him. The king's relationship with food is a tragic one. In his youth, he was a great athlete, and food was a source of fuel and pleasure. Now it is a source of comfort and a way of asserting his will in a world where his body is failing him. He is a prisoner in his own colossal body, and food is one of the few remaining pleasures he has. The doctors may tell him that eating so much is bad for him, but what do they know? They can't cure his leg, and they can't make him young again. The food is a way of clinging to the past, to a time when he was a strong, virile man who could command an army and win a jousting tournament. Historians still argue whether Henry's obesity was a form of self-medication, a way of dealing with the profound emotional and physical pain he was in. The loss of his athletic abilities, the death of his wives, the constant pressure of ruling a kingdom, all of these things would have taken a massive toll on his psyche. The food, in this context, becomes a source of comfort, a way of filling the emptiness that had grown inside him over the years. His body, once a source of pride, is now a source of shame and pain, and the food is a way of covering up that shame, of trying to assert some kind of control over a situation that is spiralling out of his control. The court's reaction to his diet is a telling sign of their changing loyalties. In his younger years, they would have been forced to eat and drink with him, a symbol of their shared camaraderie and his generous spirit. Now they eat with him out of a mixture of fear and obligation, their own diets carefully monitored and controlled. You see them watching him, their faces a mix of professional deference and morbid fascination. They are watching a king die, but they are also watching a man indulge in his final hedonistic pleasure. It is a grotesque and compelling sight, a powerful king reduced to a pathetic figure, a slave to his own appetites. The contrast between the king's lavish diet and the quiet desperation of his doctors is a powerful image. Dr. Butts, for all his learning and his medical prowess, is powerless to stop the king from eating himself to death. He can offer advice, he can prescribe remedies, but he cannot change the fundamental character of the man. The king's will, once a source of his power, is now a source of his destruction. The rotting leg is a symptom of a deeper, more profound decay, a decay of the spirit and the body that has been going on for years. The final meals, with their rich meats and sweet desserts, are a kind of final, grand gesture, a last hurrah for a man who knows deep down that his time is running out. The food is a symbol of his power, but it is also a symbol of his impending death. The feast is a prelude to the funeral, a celebration of a life that is coming to a very messy and very painful end. As the stench of decay and the cloying sweetness of the king's final feast mingle in the air, a different kind of drama unfolds in the palace's quieter corners. The focus shifts from the king's physical body to the body politic, and you find yourself observing the quiet, ruthless dance of power between the great houses of England. The court is a theatre of ambition, and the main actors are the two opposing factions, each vying for control of the Regency Council that will govern England after Henry's death. This is a game of shifting sands, and every move, every word, every alliance is a calculated step toward a future of immense power, or a swift fall from grace. The two main players are the Seymours and the Howards. At the head of the Seymour faction is Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford. He is a new man, a product of the Tudor social ladder, and he is determined to climb to the very top. His trump card, as you know, is his relationship to the future king. He is Prince Edward's maternal uncle, and he has cultivated a close relationship with the young boy, positioning himself as a trusted mentor and guardian. You see him constantly in the prince's company, his face a picture of grave concern and paternal affection. He understands that control of the boy is the key to control of the kingdom. Seymour is also a devout Protestant, and his rise to power would mean a decisive shift away from Catholicism and a consolidation of the Reformation in England. He has a powerful ally in the king's last wife, Catherine Parr, who also has Protestant sympathies and a genuine affection for the young prince. On the other side stands the mighty Howard family, a bastion of the old aristocracy and a firm supporter of the Catholic faith. Their leader is Thomas Howard, the ageing Duke of Norfolk. He is a man of vast experience and political cunning, but he is also a man haunted by the ghost of his family's past. You recall that two of his nieces, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, both married the king and both ended up on the execution block. The Duke has survived by being a master of political manoeuvring, but his position is precarious. He and his family represent the conservative wing of the court, and they are wary of the power-hungry Seymours and their radical Protestant ideas. The Howards believe that a return to Catholicism is the only way to restore order to England, and they see the young Prince Edward as a potential tool to be swayed and guided back to the old religion. The power vacuum created by the king's failing health has turned the court into a breeding ground for rumour and conspiracy. You overhear hushed conversations in the palace corridors where courtiers discuss the king's will. This is a mainstream historical fact. The will, which would name the Regency Council and determine the line of succession, was a matter of life and death. The factions are trying to influence the drafting of this document to ensure that their men are on the council and that their vision for England's future is enshrined in law. The king, in his drugged stupor and with his mind failing him, is easily swayed. You watch as men like Norfolk and Seymour bring him documents to sign, their faces a mixture of professional deference and barely concealed greed. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the use of coded language in letters between the conspirators. They would use nicknames for the king, the old man, the lion, and for each other, the ploughman, the gardener, to discuss their plans without fear of being discovered. This shows a deep-seated paranoia in the court, a fear that any misstep, any wrongly phrased word, could lead to a sudden and violent end. The king's paranoia was contagious, and it had infected the entire court. They are all playing a deadly game of espionage, with the prize being the control of England. The struggle for power is not just a battle of wills, it is a battle of symbols. The Seymours surround the young prince with Protestant tutors and advisers, ensuring that he is exposed to the ideas of the Reformation from a young age. They even encourage him to wear clothes in the style of the German Protestants, a subtle but powerful statement of their intentions. The Howards, on the other hand, try to remind the king and the court of the old traditions. You see them sponsoring elaborate Catholic feasts and ceremonies, a way of signalling their loyalty to the old faith. The court is a stage, and every action is a performance, a way of projecting an image of power and influence. Historians still argue whether the Duke of Norfolk was truly a conspirator, or if he was simply a victim of the Seymours' ruthless ambition. His son, the brilliant poet Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, was a hothead who made a number of foolish mistakes, including quartering the royal arms on his own coat of arms, an act of treason. This gave the Seymours the perfect excuse to act. They arrested both father and son on charges of treason. It was a masterpiece of political manoeuvring, and it effectively removed their greatest rival from the playing field just as the king's health was failing. You watch as the news of their arrest spreads through the court. The reaction is a mixture of shock and quiet satisfaction. The Howards' allies are terrified, knowing that the Seymours have now shown their hand. The Seymours' allies are overjoyed, knowing that the path to power is now clear. The old Duke of Norfolk, a man who had survived the fall of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, is now a prisoner in the Tower of London, his fate hanging by a thread. The once great Howard dynasty is on the verge of total collapse, a victim of its own arrogance and the shifting sands of power. It's a chilling reminder that in this court, there are no friends, only temporary allies, and that loyalty is a commodity to be bought and sold. The political machinations are a stark contrast to the quiet suffering of the king. While these men plot and scheme, the man whose power they are fighting over is writhing in pain, his body slowly being consumed by a festering wound. The palace, with its grand tapestries and gilded ceilings, is just a beautiful cage, and the king is its rotting prisoner. The ambition of his courtiers is a fire that rages outside his bedchamber, and he, in his pain and his drugged stupor, is barely aware of the inferno that is about to consume his kingdom. His slow, agonizing death is a political opportunity, and the men who stand to gain the most are already sharpening their knives. The kingdom is a prize, and the game has just entered its final, most brutal stage. As the political manoeuvring of the Seymours and Howards reaches a fever pitch, another more spectral presence begins to haunt the king's bedchamber. The air, already thick with the stench of decay and ambition, now seems to carry the faint ghostly scent of lavender and rosewater, a perfume of memory. You feel a chill as you realise that the king's final days are not just about the future, but about his past, a past populated by the ghosts of his 6 wives. The most prominent among them, the one whose memory seems to be a source of constant torment and regret for the dying king, is Anne Boleyn. Her ghost, a powerful and tragic figure, is a constant, quiet presence in the room, a reminder of the monumental decisions and horrific cruelties that defined his reign. Anne Boleyn was, of course, a mainstream historical fact, the queen for whom Henry broke with the Catholic Church, a woman whose captivating intellect and fiery spirit captivated him and changed the course of English history. But she was also a woman he grew to hate, a woman he accused of witchcraft and adultery, and a woman he sent to the scaffold. Her execution was a defining moment of his reign, a chilling display of his ruthless will. Now, as he lies dying, you see flashes of regret in his pain-clouded eyes. He will sometimes cry out in his sleep, a name on his lips, a name you recognise as hers. He's a man haunted by his past, and Anne Boleyn, with her sharp wit and her final defiant words, is the most potent of his ghosts. The memory of Anne is a constant torment, but it is also a source of great anxiety for the Protestant faction. They see her as a martyr for their cause, a woman who stood against the old religion and paid the ultimate price. The Seymours and their allies use her memory as a political tool, a way of reminding the king and the court of the righteousness of their cause. They will talk to him about his daughter Elizabeth, Anne's child, and her bright intellect, a way of reminding him of the legacy he created. But for the king, the memory is more personal. It is the memory of a love that turned to hatred, of a woman he adored and then destroyed. He is a man with a heavy conscience, and the weight of his actions is crushing him in his final days. The other wives also make their presence felt in the room, albeit more subtly. You see a portrait of Jane Seymour, his beloved third wife and the mother of Prince Edward, hanging in the chamber. She's a symbol of everything he wanted, a male heir, a quiet and submissive wife, and the stability of a dynasty. Her death after childbirth was a crushing blow to him, and her memory is a source of nostalgic pain. He will sometimes point to her portrait, a look of profound sadness on his face. She represents the ideal wife he could never have, a fantasy of what his life could have been. Then there is Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, the woman he divorced to marry Anne Boleyn. Her memory is a more complex one, a mixture of guilt and justification. He spent decades trying to erase her from history, but her daughter, the fiercely Catholic Mary, is a living testament to her enduring power. The Howards and the Catholic faction use her memory as a rallying cry, a way of reminding the court of the king's ungodly break with the church. They talk about Mary's unwavering faith and her rightful claim to the throne, a way of challenging the legitimacy of the king's reformation. For Henry, Catherine's ghost is a source of lingering guilt, a reminder of the man he once was and the promises he broke. The ghost of Catherine Howard, Anne's niece and his fifth wife, is also present, a reminder of his own foolishness and his susceptibility to manipulation. She was a beautiful young woman, and he was a pathetic old man. Her youthful indiscretions, which led to her execution for treason, were a source of profound embarrassment for the king, and her memory is a source of shame. He is a man who always saw himself as a powerful, virile monarch, and her betrayal was a powerful blow to his ego. Her ghost is a reminder of his own frailty and his own mortality. A quirky or fringe tidbit of the time is the superstition surrounding ghosts and haunted rooms. The servants in the palace believe that the ghosts of the executed queens, especially Anne Boleyn, haunted the royal apartments. You hear them whispering stories of a headless queen walking the corridors, a chilling ghost story that seems all too real in the dark, oppressive atmosphere of the palace. It's a strange blend of religious belief and folk superstition, and it shows you how deeply the king's cruelties had embedded themselves in the popular imagination. Historians still argue whether Henry felt genuine remorse for the executions of his wives, or if his tormented cries were simply a product of his pain and his drugged state. His public persona was one of unwavering conviction and unshakable will, and he never in public showed any signs of regret. But in the privacy of his bedchamber, with his body failing him and his mind unravelling, a different man emerges, a man haunted by the ghosts of his past. He is a man who lived his life with absolute certainty, and now, at the end, that certainty is beginning to crumble. The memory of his past wives, and especially the ghost of Anne Boleyn, is a powerful force in his final weeks. She is a symbol of his power, his cruelty, his passion, and his ultimate downfall. Her ghost is a reminder that no matter how powerful a man is, he cannot escape the consequences of his actions. The political machinations of the Seymours and Howards are a distraction, a way of avoiding the real drama that is unfolding in the king's bedchamber, the final agonising reckoning of a man with his own conscience. The king is not just dying, he is being judged, and the ghosts of his past are his silent, unwavering judges. The stench of his rotting leg is a physical manifestation of the moral decay that has been gnawing at him for decades, a decay that is now coming to a final gruesome conclusion. The king's final weeks are a haunted house, and he is its terrified, guilt-ridden occupant. Amidst the ghosts of the past and the political machinations of the future, there is one figure who stands as a quiet anchor in the stormy sea of Henry's final weeks, Queen Catherine Parr. She is the last of his 6 wives, a woman who has not only survived the dangerous currents of the Tudor court, but has managed to exert a gentle, stabilising influence on the king and his household. You see her moving through the bedchamber, a portrait of serene composure, her face a mask of concern and quiet diplomacy. She's a woman of immense courage and shrewd intelligence, a figure who defies the easy stereotypes of the passive queen consort. Catherine Parr's role is a fascinating and crucial one. As a mainstream historical fact, she was a devout Protestant, a reformer in her own right, but she was also a woman who understood the art of survival in a hostile environment. She knew how to placate the king's rages, how to manage his moods, and how to create a semblance of calm in a world that was rapidly descending into chaos. Her influence on the king is not just political, it is personal. She is the one who tends to his wounds, who reads to him when he is in too much pain to sleep, and who tries to bridge the growing gap between the dying king and his children. She is a maternal figure for all 3 of his children, Edward, Mary and Elizabeth, and she works tirelessly to ensure that they are treated with love and respect, a quiet act of defiance against the factions that would use them as political pawns. The Queen's diplomatic efforts are particularly focused on mending the fractured relationship between Henry and his daughters. You see her speaking with Mary, a staunch Catholic, with a level of patience and understanding that no one else in the court possesses. She does not try to change Mary's mind, but she does try to get her to a place of reconciliation with her father. She knows that a kingdom divided by religion is a recipe for disaster, and she sees the children as the key to a peaceful succession. Her relationship with Elizabeth is much closer, as they share a love of learning and a sympathy for the Protestant cause. You see them sometimes, huddled over a book, their heads bent in quiet conversation, a shared bond of intellect and faith. For Catherine, the children are not just political tools, they are the future of England, and she is determined to give them the best possible start. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the fact that Catherine Parr was a published author. She wrote a book of prayers and meditations, which was the first book published in England by a woman under her own name. This is a testament to her intellect and her reformist beliefs, and it shows you that she was not just a political figure, but a woman of deep faith and conviction. She was a scholar in her own right, and she used her position to promote the Protestant cause, even at great personal risk. This, you realise, is what makes her so dangerous to the conservative faction. She's not just a gentle caregiver, she's a powerful intellectual force, a queen who wields not a sword but a pen, and her influence on the young Prince Edward is a source of immense anxiety for the Howards. Historians still argue whether Catherine's influence on the king was a matter of genuine affection or a carefully calculated political strategy. She was, after all, a woman who had to survive in a court where a king's favour could mean the difference between life and death. Her gentle care for the king, her patient diplomacy, and her efforts to reconcile the royal family could be seen as either acts of genuine compassion or as clever ways of consolidating her own power and ensuring the peaceful succession of her stepson. Given the brutal reality of Tudor politics, it is likely that it was a combination of both. She was a woman who could be both a devoted wife and a shrewd political player, a master of a game that had claimed the lives of her predecessors. The Queen's influence is also a source of great frustration for the factions that are trying to isolate the king. The Seymours, while they are her allies, are wary of her power. The Howards, of course, see her as their primary enemy, a Protestant queen who is poisoning the king's mind and ensuring the triumph of the reformers. You see them sometimes trying to turn the king against her, whispering in his ear about her heretical beliefs and her close relationship with the young Prince Edward. But the king, in his final days, seems to be a man who has grown weary of the political battles and the religious debates. He finds solace in her presence, and her quiet, unwavering support is a source of genuine comfort to him. Catherine Parr's role is a subtle but powerful one. She's not a figure who commands armies or issues decrees, but she's a figure who shapes the minds and hearts of the people around her. She's a woman who uses her position not for personal gain, but for the good of the kingdom. A woman who sees the bigger picture in a world of petty squabbles and ruthless ambition. The stability she provides is fragile, and it depends entirely on her ability to manage the king's moods and the court's factions. The peace she has created is a temporary one, a brief lull before the storm that will inevitably break when the king finally dies. You watch as she sits by the king's bedside, her hand resting gently on his forehead, a picture of quiet devotion. She is not a ghost from his past, but a living, breathing woman of immense strength and courage, a woman who is trying to heal the wounds of a lifetime of cruelty and chaos. She is the queen, but she is also a nurse, a mother, and a diplomat, all rolled into one. Her presence is a testament to the fact that even in the most brutal and ruthless of environments, there is still room for compassion and genuine human connection. Her quiet influence is a force for good in a world of darkness, and her story is a powerful reminder that history is not just made by the powerful men who wield swords, but by the quiet women who heal and reconcile with a gentle hand. Her role in the king's final weeks is a crucial one, and her quiet, diplomatic efforts will have a lasting impact on the future of England. The air in the palace is a suffocating blanket, a testament to the fact that you have now stepped fully into the king's private world. The stench of decay, which before was just a background note, is now a full-throated symphony of foulness. You're no longer just a distant observer. You're an unwilling participant in the sensory horror of the king's bedchamber. The room, for all its opulent trappings, the heavy velvet drapes, the gilded furniture, the tapestries depicting heroic hunts, is a nauseating and claustrophobic prison. It's a space where the reality of the king's body and the political decay it represents has become inescapable. The most powerful sensory assault is, of course, the smell. It's a complex, multi-layered aroma that assaults you the moment you cross the threshold. There is the overpowering scent of the king's rotting leg, a sweet, putrid smell of dead flesh that clings to everything. Then there is the smell of the poultices and salves, a mixture of strong herbs and honey that only serves to create a more cloying, sickly sweet aroma. And beneath it all is the acrid scent of human waste. For the king is so immobile that he is often forced to relieve himself in his bed. It's a smell that no amount of incense or rosewater can mask, a smell that speaks of a man who has lost all dignity and control. The servants in the room move with a quiet, grim purpose, their faces a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed revulsion. They are a living testament to the fact that even a king's body is a fragile, mortal thing. The heat is another oppressive factor. The room is kept stiflingly warm, a misguided attempt to keep the king's fevers in check and to prevent his body from shivering. The air is thick and heavy, and it feels as though every breath you take is a struggle. The tapestries on the walls, once a symbol of the king's wealth and power, now seem to hold the heat in. creating a kind of hothouse atmosphere where the stench of decay can fester and grow. It's a miserable, unbearable environment, and you realise that for the king, this is his entire world. He's a man who once rode across his kingdom on a magnificent horse, but now he is confined to a single room, a prisoner of his own failing body. The visual aspect of the bedchamber is equally grim. The king himself is a monstrous figure, a swollen, immobile mass of flesh. His once regal face is puffy and pale, his eyes are often bloodshot and clouded with pain. The sores on his leg are a horrific sight, a constellation of blackened, weeping wounds that are slowly consuming his flesh. He is a grotesque and pathetic figure, a parody of the powerful monarch he once was. The bed, a magnificent piece of furniture with heavy curtains and a gilded frame, is now just a cage. The sheets are often stained and dishevelled, and the pillows are soaked with sweat. It's a far cry from the image of the triumphant king, and it's a powerful reminder that even the most powerful men are ultimately slaves to their own biology. A quirky or fringe tidbit of the time is the belief that certain smells could ward off evil spirits and disease. The doctors and apothecaries would often burn sweet-smelling herbs and spices in the room, believing that the smoke would purify the air and prevent the king from getting sicker. The irony, of course, is that the stench of his body was far more potent than any of their herbal remedies, and the smoke only served to create a more cloying, nauseating mixture of smells. It's a tragicomic attempt to control the uncontrollable, a desperate act of superstition in a world where science had failed. Historians still argue whether the king was fully aware of the state of his own body. Was he so drugged and so inured to the pain that he was oblivious to the stench and the decay? Or was he fully aware of his own decomposition, a silent, agonizing witness to his own demise? Given his bursts of paranoia and his flashes of lucidity, it is likely a combination of both. In his moments of clarity, he must have been acutely aware of his own state, a powerful and proud man reduced to a helpless, rotting invalid. This awareness, you realise, would have been a torment more profound than any physical pain. The emotional atmosphere in the bedchamber is a reflection of the physical one. There is a palpable sense of tension and fear. The servants are terrified of making a mistake that might incur the king's wrath. The courtiers who are allowed in the room are a picture of forced composure. Their faces a mask of professional concern, but behind the mask you can see the fear, the ambition, and the morbid fascination. They are all watching a man die, and they are all hoping that his death will bring them power and wealth. The bedchamber, once the seat of power, is now a stage for a macabre drama, a dance of death with the king as its main, unwitting star. The chamber is a kind of living tomb, a place where life is slowly ebbing away and where the future is already being planned. The Queen, Catherine Parr, is the only one who seems to be able to breathe in this suffocating atmosphere. She sits by the king's side, her hand on his forehead, a quiet and reassuring presence. She does not seem to notice the smell, the heat, or the squalor. Her focus is on the man, not on the body. She is a powerful symbol of compassion in a world of ruthless ambition, a woman who is trying to bring some measure of dignity to a man who is dying a very undignified death. But even she cannot hold back the tide of decay. The stench is a physical reality, and it is a powerful reminder that all men, even kings, are ultimately mortal. The Chamber of Stench is more than a room. It is a symbol of the end of an era, a final gruesome tableau of the mortality of a titan. The oppressive atmosphere of the royal bedchamber, heavy with the stench of decay and the suffocating heat, is punctuated by a new and more tragic development. The once booming, fearsome voice of King Henry VIII, the voice that commanded armies and dictated the course of a nation's religion, is now little more than a whisper. The great Lion of England is losing his roar, and his decline in mental acuity is becoming painfully apparent to all who surround him. You are a witness to the slow, agonizing fade of a man's mind, a decline that is both a physical and a political reality. Henry's voice, a mainstream historical fact, was legendary. In his younger years he was known for his commanding presence and his powerful, resonant voice that could silence a room and inspire awe. Now that voice is a raspy, slurred whisper, the words often incoherent and lost in a fog of pain and opium. It is a sign of his advanced physical decay, the result of a body that is failing on every level. The muscles in his throat are weakening, his breath is shallow and laboured, and his mind, clouded by fever and narcotics, struggles to form coherent thoughts. It is a pathetic end for a man who wielded words like weapons. The king's decline in mental acuity is not just a matter of slurred speech, it is a matter of faltering memory and unpredictable temper. He will sometimes forget who he is speaking to, calling his wife by the name of a previous queen, or mistaking a trusted courtier for a long-dead rival. These moments of confusion are a source of immense anxiety for the court, for they are a clear sign that the king is losing his grasp on reality. His famous temper, once a tool of his absolute power, is now a frightening and unpredictable force. He will fly into a rage over a small slight, a forgotten detail or a perceived betrayal, his face turning a sickly purple and his hands shaking with impotent fury. These outbursts are not the calculated anger of a powerful monarch, but the lashing out of a man who is terrified and in pain, a caged animal striking at the bars of his own prison. The unpredictable nature of his temper is a key element of the political drama unfolding around him. The factions vying for power, the Seymours and the Howards, are constantly trying to manage and manipulate his moods. They will bring him news that they know will please him, and they will carefully filter out anything that might provoke a rage. They are, in a sense, managing a child, and the kingdom is the prize. They are the true rulers of England now, and the king is just a figurehead, a symbol of a power that he no longer possesses. You see them sometimes with a mixture of pity and contempt, trying to soothe him, their voices soft and their hands gentle, as if they are handling a dangerous, unstable beast. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the use of whispering holes in the palace walls. These were small holes, often disguised behind tapestries or paintings, that allowed servants and courtiers to listen in on the king's private conversations. In his final weeks, these holes would have been a source of immense gossip and political intelligence. The factions would have been desperate to know what the king was saying, who he was speaking to, and what he was planning. The whispering holes were a physical manifestation of the paranoia that had infected the court, a world where no conversation was truly private and no secret was truly safe. Historians still argue whether Henry's unpredictable temper and faltering memory were the result of his physical ailments, or if they were the early signs of a more profound mental illness. Some speculate that he was suffering from some form of dementia, a condition that would have been completely misunderstood and misdiagnosed in the 16th century. Others argue that his behaviour was a natural result of a lifetime of head injuries from jousting, which could have caused a form of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. A king who was once a force of nature was now a source of fear and instability, a ticking time bomb of rage and confusion. The king's decline is a tragedy, but it is also a source of a strange kind of liberation for his children. For Edward, the young prince, the king's weakness is an opportunity. He sees his father's frailty not as a source of sadness, but as a path to his own power. For Mary and Elizabeth, the king's decline is a source of a more complex set of emotions. For Mary, the king's illness is a confirmation of her belief that his break with the Catholic Church was a sin against God, a sin that is now being punished with a slow and agonizing death. For Elizabeth, the king's weakness is a source of a more pragmatic kind of hope. She sees a future where the power of the king is not absolute, a future where she, as a woman of intelligence and wit, can have a voice and a role to play. The king's decline, in a strange way, is the beginning of their rise. The fading voice of the king is a powerful symbol of the end of an era. The Lion of England is no longer roaring, he is whimpering. His once fearsome presence is now a source of pity and contempt, and his once absolute power is now a thing of the past. The court, once a stage for his grand performances, is now a stage for his final, pathetic tragedy. The sound of his raspy, slurred whisper is a constant reminder that all men, no matter how powerful, are ultimately mortal, and that all power, no matter how absolute, is ultimately temporary. The great Titan is falling, and the world he created is already beginning to crumble around him. The silence that follows his last breath, you realise, will not be a moment of sorrow, but a moment of a great, collective sigh of relief. The king's fading voice and the increasing unpredictability of his temper have a profound effect on the political landscape of the court. With the Lion of England no longer in full command of his faculties, the true seat of power has shifted. It is no longer in the royal bedchamber, but in the discreet candlelit rooms where the Privy Council holds its clandestine meetings. You find yourself observing these gatherings from the shadows, a silent witness to a new kind of power, one that is born not of divine right, but of ruthless political strategy and a keen understanding of the king's weaknesses. The Privy Council is a mainstream historical fact, a body of the king's most trusted advisers, but in these final weeks their role has changed. They are no longer simply advising a king, they are governing a kingdom on behalf of a king who can no longer govern himself. The council is dominated by the two warring factions, the Seymours, led by Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, and the Conservatives, now leaderless after the arrest of the Duke of Norfolk and his son. The meetings are a masterpiece of political theatre, a world of coded language and unspoken threats. You see men who were once rivals now forced to sit at the same table, their faces a mask of professional courtesy as they debate the future of a kingdom. The most pressing issue on the council's agenda is the king's will. This is a document of immense importance, as it will not only name the heir to the throne, but also establish the Regency Council that will rule in the young Prince Edward's name. The Seymours are determined to stack the council with their own men, ensuring a Protestant future for England. The Conservatives, what is left of them, are fighting a desperate rearguard action, trying to protect their interests and their faith from the encroaching power of the Reformers. You see them debate the wording of the will with a ferocity that is barely concealed, their voices hushed, their eyes darting to the door as if expecting the king to burst in at any moment. But the king, of course, does not burst in. He's in his bedchamber, writhing in pain or lost in an opium-induced haze. His absence is both a curse and a blessing. It allows the council to operate with a freedom that they have never had before, but it also means that they are constantly on edge, knowing that their power is built on a very fragile foundation. What if the king has a moment of lucidity? What if he were to demand to see the will? What if he were to discover their machinations? The fear of the king's unpredictable rages, even from a distance, is a powerful force, and it shapes every decision they make. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the use of proxy votes in the council. A proxy vote was a vote cast by a councillor on behalf of an absent member. In these final weeks you see the Seymours use this to their advantage, claiming that the king has given them the authority to cast votes on his behalf. It's a bold and audacious claim, and it allows them to push through their agenda with a speed that would have been unthinkable in the past. It's a testament to their ruthlessness and their political genius, and it's a clear sign that the king's power has been completely usurped. Historians still argue whether the Privy Council's actions were a necessary evil or a blatant act of treason. Were they truly acting in the best interests of the kingdom, trying to ensure a peaceful and stable transition of power? Or were they simply a group of ambitious men seizing an opportunity to consolidate their own power? Given the brutal realities of Tudor politics, it is likely that it was a combination of both. They were men of great ambition, but they were also men who genuinely believed that their vision for England was the right one. They saw the king as a decaying symbol of a bygone era, and they saw themselves as the architects of a new, more modern future. The clandestine meetings of the council are a stark contrast to the public spectacle of the court. In the public eye, the court still projects an image of strength and stability. The jousts and the feasts may have stopped, but the daily rituals of the court continue. The king's body is carefully tended to, his illnesses are described in euphemistic terms, and the illusion of a strong, healthy monarch is maintained. But in the dark, quiet rooms of the Privy Council, the truth is laid bare. The king is dying, and the men who once served him are now planning for a future without him. The meetings are a kind of political chess match, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other. The Seymours, with their superior numbers and their control of the young prince, have the upper hand. But the Conservatives, with their deep-seated roots in the aristocracy and their connection to the Catholic faith, are a formidable opponent. They may have lost their leader, but they are not yet defeated. They are a constant, quiet threat, a reminder that the Seymours' path to power will not be an easy one. The air in the council meetings is thick with tension, a silent battle of wills that will ultimately determine the future of England. The king, in his bedchamber, is utterly oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. He's a man who has lost control of his own body and his own mind, and now he has lost control of his own kingdom. The power he once held, the power he so ruthlessly fought to maintain, has been siphoned away, flowing into the hands of the very men who served him. The council's clandestine meetings are a powerful symbol of the end of an era, a final, ruthless testament to the fact that in the world of politics, a king is only as powerful as the men who serve him. The king's final weeks are not just a story of a man's death. They are a story of a great and ruthless power transfer, a quiet coup that will change the course of English history forever. The clandestine meetings of the Privy Council are a quiet, ruthless drama, but as you move through the palace, you are confronted with a final, brutal act of the king himself. A shocking reminder that the lion, though dying, can still bear his claws. This act is the execution of Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, the brilliant but arrogant son of the Duke of Norfolk. This is not a political decision made by a council. It is a cold, calculated act of a dying tyrant, a final, chilling demonstration of his absolute, unyielding power. The story of the Earl of Surrey is a mainstream historical fact, but in the context of the king's final weeks, it takes on a more sinister and poignant meaning. Surrey was a poet of immense talent, a true Renaissance man, but he was also a man of immense hubris. He made the fatal mistake of believing that his family's lineage and his own talent gave him immunity from the king's wrath. He was a proud man, and his arrogance was his downfall. His crime, as you recall, was quartering the royal arms on his own coat of arms, a symbolic act of treason that the Seymours were quick to seize upon. It was a foolish and reckless act, and it provided the perfect pretext for his enemies to act. The Seymours, as you know, were masters of political manoeuvring. They had long seen the Howards as their primary rivals, and they had been looking for a way to neutralise them. Surrey's act of arrogance was the perfect opportunity. They brought the charges of treason against him, and they convinced the king, in one of his moments of lucidity, to sign the execution order. For the Seymours, it was a ruthless act of political genius. It eliminated a key rival, and it sent a clear message to anyone who might dare to challenge their authority. But for the king, the act was something else entirely. It was a final, ruthless demonstration of his power. He was a man who had spent his entire life demanding absolute loyalty, and he would not tolerate a challenge to his authority, even a symbolic one, from anyone, no matter how talented or well-born they were. He was a man who had built his reign on fear, and he was determined to end it with a final, brutal flourish. The execution of Surrey was not about justice, it was about power. It was a clear and unambiguous message to the court. I may be dying, but I am still the king, and my will is still absolute. You watch as the news of the execution spreads through the palace. The reaction is one of quiet terror. The courtiers, who had been whispering about the king's weakness, are now reminded of his cruelty. The Seymours' allies are overjoyed, but even they are a little shaken by the ruthlessness of the act. The Howards' allies are, of course, terrified. They had hoped that the king, in his final days, might show some mercy, but they now know that there is no mercy to be had. The king is a man who will not forgive, and he will not forget. The fate of the Duke of Norfolk, Surrey's father, hangs in the balance. He too has been condemned for treason. The Seymours are pushing for his execution, knowing that his death would effectively eliminate the last remaining obstacle to their complete control of the Regency Council. But the king, in one of his final acts, seems to be wavering. A quirky or fringe tidbit of the time is that the king had a fondness for the old duke, who had served him loyally for decades. He was a man of the old world, a man who had been a part of Henry's life for so long that his absence would have been a profoundly unsettling thing. Henry, in his final, drugged stupor, seems to be in a state of internal conflict. Historians still argue whether the king was genuinely conflicted about the Duke of Norfolk's execution, or if his wavering was a result of his failing mind. Did he have a final, fleeting moment of compassion, or was he simply too ill and too incoherent to sign the final execution order? Whatever the reason, the fact remains that the Duke of Norfolk survived the king. The execution order for his father was never signed, and he was freed from the Tower of London after the king's death. This is a crucial historical fact, as it shows that even in his final days, the king's power was not absolute. The Privy Council, in their desire to consolidate their own power, was unable to push through the execution without the king's final, unambiguous assent. The execution of Surrey is a powerful and poignant moment. Here is a man of immense talent, a poet who helped to shape the English language, a man who believed that his art and his lineage would save him, only to be destroyed by the cold, ruthless politics of a dying king. His death is a grim reminder that in the world of Tudor England, talent and lineage were no match for the king's absolute will. It is a story of a great man brought low by his own arrogance and the ruthlessness of his rivals. It is a tragic end for a poet, but a fitting end for a rival in the Tudor court. This final act of cruelty is the last flicker of the king's former power. He is a man who is physically and mentally failing, but he is still capable of immense cruelty. He is a man who is losing his grasp on reality, but he is still able to order a man's death. The execution of Surrey is a final, brutal masterpiece, a last testament to a man who lived his life with a single-minded focus on power and control. It is a chilling and heartbreaking moment, a final dark chapter in the story of a man who was once a hero and is now a monster. The rotting stench of his leg is a physical manifestation of the moral decay that has been gnawing at him for decades, and the execution of Surrey is its final bloody conclusion. The king is dying, but he is not yet dead, and his last act is a grim reminder that in this world, even the most beautiful things can be destroyed by a single, ruthless act. The air in the palace, once a mixture of decay and courtly intrigue, now carries the distinct sharp tang of a different kind of ailment. Beyond the rotting leg and the fevers, another condition, one that has plagued kings and commoners alike for centuries, is taking its toll on Henry. This is the gout, a mainstream historical fact, and it is more than just a source of physical pain. It is a symbol of the king's immobility and his loss of control. As you move through the royal apartments, you see the physical manifestations of this agonizing condition, and you begin to understand how this relentless pain has shaped the king's final weeks. Gout, in the 16th century, was known as the disease of kings, or the rich man's disease, because of its strong association with a diet rich in red meat, wine, and other indulgences, the very diet that Henry had so gleefully consumed for decades. It is caused by a build-up of uric acid in the joints, which crystallizes and causes excruciating pain. For Henry, this meant that his joints, particularly in his feet and hands, were a constant source of torment. You see his hands, once powerful and steady, now swollen and twisted, the knuckles large and disfigured. He can no longer hold a pen to sign a document with any degree of clarity, a detail that the Privy Council is only too happy to exploit. The pain from the gout is a different kind of agony from the ulcer on his leg. The ulcer is a constant festering wound, a slow-motion rot. The gout, on the other hand, comes in sudden, violent flares of pain. You watch him sometimes, a sharp cry escaping his lips as a sudden stabbing pain shoots through his joints. These flares of pain are not just physical, they are psychological. They are a constant reminder of his own fragility, a reminder that his body, once a source of immense pride, is now a source of unending pain and humiliation. The once great athlete is now a prisoner in his own body, unable to walk, unable to stand, and often unable to even sit in a comfortable position. This physical confinement has a profound political effect. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the king's physical immobility was so complete that he had to be moved around the palace in a custom-built wheeled chair, a kind of early wheelchair that required several servants to manoeuvre. This chair, a magnificent piece of furniture in its own right, is a powerful symbol of his loss of power. The king who once strode through his court with an air of absolute authority is now being pushed around like a helpless invalid. The courtiers, who once bowed before him, now have to bend down to hear him, their faces a mixture of deference and barely concealed pity. The power dynamics of the court have been fundamentally altered by his physical decline. The gout, along with the ulcer and the fevers, has created a kind of feedback loop of misery. The pain from the gout keeps him from sleeping, which exacerbates his fevers. The fevers, in turn, make him more irritable and prone to unpredictable rages. The lack of exercise and his poor diet only make the gout worse, and the cycle continues, a relentless march toward a final agonizing end. The doctors, in their futile attempts to treat him, only seem to make things worse. They prescribe various herbal remedies and poultices, none of which have any real effect on his condition. The king, in his desperation, will sometimes demand that they try a new remedy, a new herb, or a new magical cure, a frantic, pathetic search for a solution that does not exist. Historians still argue whether Henry's gout was the sole cause of his immobility, or if his jousting accident in 1536, which caused a leg wound that never healed, was the primary factor. it is likely that both conditions contributed to his decline, creating a perfect storm of physical agony that ultimately confined him to his bedchamber. Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. A king who was once a symbol of immense physical power was now a symbol of immense physical frailty. The weight of his own body, a body that he once took such pride in, is now a crushing burden. The king's gout is a powerful metaphor for his reign. His reign, like his body, was defined by a certain kind of immobility, a stubborn refusal to change course. He had broken with the Catholic Church, not out of a genuine belief in Protestantism, but out of a desperate desire for a male heir and a need to assert his own absolute authority. He was a man who, once he had made a decision, would not be swayed from his course, even if it led to disaster. His reign, like his body, was a victim of his own excesses and his own stubbornness. The gout, a disease caused by his own indulgence, is a fitting punishment for a man who believed that the rules did not apply to him. The court's reaction to his gout is a telling sign of their changing loyalties. In his younger years, they would have been forced to pretend that his pain did not exist, or they would have praised his stoicism. Now, in his final weeks, they are openly discussing his pain, his weakness, and his impending death. His physical decline is a public spectacle, and the courtiers are all spectators, watching a man die a slow, agonizing, and undignified death. The gout, with its sudden flares of pain and its slow, grinding disfigurement, is a powerful symbol of his final, painful reckoning with his own mortality. He is a man who lived his life with a singular focus on power and control, and now, at the end, he is powerless against the slow, inexorable decay of his own body. The weight of the gout is a weight of a lifetime of indulgence and cruelty, a weight that is finally and irrevocably crushing him. The physical pain of the gout and the festering ulcer are not the only torments Henry endures in his final weeks. There is a deeper, more spiritual agony that gnaws at him, a profound crisis of faith that is intertwined with the political and personal decisions of his life. The air in the bedchamber, already heavy with the smell of decay, now seems to carry the invisible weight of a man's conscience. You are a silent witness to a king's final reckoning with God, a man who reshaped the very religion of his kingdom, now grappling with the terrifying question of his own salvation. Henry's struggle with faith is a mainstream historical fact, one that defined his entire reign. He was a devout Catholic in his youth, a man who wrote a book defending the faith and was given the title Defender of the Faith by the Pope himself. But he was also a man who, out of a desperate desire for a male heir, broke with that same church, declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, and set off a chain of events that would change the course of English history forever. Now, as he lies dying, you see the profound irony of his situation. He is a man who destroyed an old religion and created a new one, and he is now terrified that he made the wrong choice. His crisis of faith is a source of immense anxiety for the court. The Protestant faction, led by the Seymours, is desperate to ensure that the king dies a good Protestant. They bring him books of Protestant theology, they read to him from the New English Bible, and they encourage him to speak about his belief in the supremacy of the king over the Pope. They see his final moments as a final, decisive battle for the soul of England, and they are determined to win. For them, his final words will not just be the words of a dying man, they will be the final triumphant declaration of the Reformation. The Catholic faction, what is left of it after the fall of the Howards, is also at work, albeit more subtly. They have no access to the king's private bedchamber, but they are whispering in the corridors of the palace, spreading rumours that the king is secretly returning to the old faith. They speak of his regret over the dissolution of the monasteries, a key tenet of his Reformation, and his sorrow over the executions of men like Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher, men who died for their loyalty to the Pope. They are hoping for a miracle, a deathbed conversion that will turn the tide of history back to the old religion. The king himself is a man torn between two worlds. In his moments of lucidity, he seems to genuinely believe in the Protestant doctrines he created. He speaks of the need for the Bible to be in the vernacular, and he rails against the superstitions of the Catholic Church. But in his drugged stupors and his moments of deep pain, he seems to regress to the old faith. He will sometimes call out for a priest to hear his confession, and he will speak of the need for the sacraments, the very rituals he so ruthlessly suppressed. He's a man with one foot in the old world and one foot in the new, and his soul is being torn apart by the conflict. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the use of deathbed portraits or likenesses, a strange and morbid tradition where artists would be brought in to create a final, posthumous portrait or death mask of the king. You see artists hovering in the palace, their faces a mixture of professional detachment and morbid fascination. They are there to capture the final image of a king, a man who has always been obsessed with his public image. The final portrait, you realise, will be a powerful tool for the factions that follow him. The Seymours will want a portrait that shows a serene, peaceful king, a man who died a good Protestant. The Conservatives will want a portrait that shows a tormented, guilt-ridden man, a man who died in a state of mortal fear. The final image of the king will be as contested as his final will. Historians still argue whether the king was genuinely struggling with his faith, or if his religious pronouncements were simply a product of his political needs. Was he a man who genuinely believed in the Reformation? Or was he a man who used religion as a tool for his own personal and political gain? The answer, you realise, is likely a complex one. He was a man who believed in the absolute authority of the king, and he saw himself as God's representative on earth. His break with the Pope was, for him, not an act of heresy, but an act of assertion of his own divine right. But as he lies dying, that absolute certainty is beginning to crumble, and he is forced to confront the terrifying possibility that he might have been wrong. The king's struggle with faith is a profound one. He's a man who lived his life with a singular focus on power and control, and now, at the end, he is forced to confront a power that is greater than his own. He's a man who lived his life with a kind of reckless certainty, and now, at the end, he is plagued by a deep and profound doubt. The stench of his rotting leg is a physical manifestation of his moral decay, and his crisis of faith is its spiritual conclusion. The king is dying, and he is forced to confront the terrible possibility that he may have condemned his own soul to an eternity of hellfire. It is a frightening and poignant end for a man who, for so long, believed himself to be a god on earth. His final weeks are not just a story of a man's death, they are a story of a man's final, agonizing reckoning with his own conscience. The king's final fear is not death, but damnation, and it is a fear that is slowly and irrevocably consuming him. The king's internal struggle with faith and the external reality of his physical decay are not just private matters, they are public spectacle. The court, and indeed the entire kingdom, is watching the final performance of King Henry VIII, and every detail, from his fading voice to the state of his portrait, is scrutinised for meaning. The art of the dying king, a mainstream historical fact, is a fascinating and crucial element of his final weeks. You find yourself observing the work of artists and craftsmen, men who are tasked with a most unusual job, to create an image of power and authority from a body that is actively decomposing. Henry VIII was a man who understood the power of his own image. In his prime, he commissioned portraits that depicted him as a powerful, muscular and virile king, a symbol of England's strength. Now, in his final weeks, that image is a lie, and the artists who surround him are tasked with the difficult job of maintaining that lie. You see them moving through the palace, their faces a mixture of professional detachment and morbid fascination. They are there to capture a final likeness of the king, a posthumous portrait that will be a powerful tool for the factions that follow him. The Seymours want an image of a serene, peaceful king, a man who died a good Protestant. The Conservatives want a portrait that shows a tormented, guilt-ridden man, a man who died in a state of mortal fear. The final image of the king will be as contested as his final will. The king himself, in his moments of lucidity, is still a man who is obsessed with his public image. He will sometimes demand to see the artist's work, his eyes clouded with pain, and his hands trembling with rage if he does not like what he sees. He's a man who has lived his life in the public eye, and he is determined to control his final image, even from the confines of his bedchamber. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the use of death masks, a plaster cast of a person's face taken after they have died. These masks, a common practice for royalty and the wealthy, were a way of creating a permanent likeness of the deceased. You see the craftsmen in the palace, their tools laid out, waiting for the inevitable moment when they will be called in to create the final likeness of the king. It's a strange and morbid tradition, a way of immortalising a man whose body has become a source of shame and revulsion. Historians still argue whether the final portraits of Henry VIII, which were created in the last years of his life, were an accurate reflection of his physical state, or if they were a deliberate attempt to project a false image of power. It is likely that they were a combination of both. The artists, in their desire to please the king, would have been forced to minimise his physical ailments, to smooth over his bloated features, and to create an image of a man who was still in control. But even in the most flattering portraits, you can see the signs of his decline. The puffy face, the small pained eyes, the sense of immense weight and immobility. All of these details are present, a subtle but powerful testament to the reality of his physical decay. The art of the dying king, in a sense, is an art of deception, a way of maintaining the illusion of power in the face of absolute, undeniable frailty. The court's reaction to these portraits is a telling sign of their changing loyalties. The Seymours and their allies would praise the portraits, talking about the king's regal bearing and his powerful presence. They would use the portraits as a tool of propaganda, a way of convincing the public that the king was still in charge and that the transition of power would be a peaceful and stable one. The Conservatives, on the other hand, would look at the portraits with a different eye. They would see the signs of his decline, the puffy features and the pained eyes, and they would see a man who was being punished by God for his sins. The portraits, in a sense, were Rorschach tests for the court, a way of revealing their own biases and their own hopes for the future. The king's final portraits are a powerful metaphor for his reign. His reign, like his body, was a masterpiece of illusion and deception. He was a man who presented himself as a powerful, omnipotent king, but he was also a man who was deeply insecure and who was constantly worried about his own legacy. His portraits, with their combination of regal grandeur and subtle signs of decay, are a perfect reflection of his reign. He was a man who created an image of absolute power, but he was also a man who was ultimately powerless against the slow, inexorable march of time and mortality. The art of the dying king is a grim and poignant reminder that no matter how powerful a man is, he cannot escape his own biology. The final portraits and likenesses are more than just works of art. They are historical documents, a window into the mind of a man who was grappling with his own mortality. They are a testament to his obsession with his own image, and they are a powerful reminder that even in his final weeks, the king was still performing, still trying to control the narrative of his own life. The king's final performance is a tragic one. A man who is physically and mentally failing, but who is still trying to project an image of power and authority. The rotting stench of his leg is a physical reality, but the art of the dying king is a psychological reality, a powerful and poignant final act of a man who is a master of his own public image. The final image of the king will be a lie, but it is a lie that will be crucial to the stability of the kingdom he leaves behind. The art of the dying king, with its carefully curated lies and subtle truths, is a public spectacle. But in the most private rooms of the palace, another, more consequential drama is unfolding. This is the creation of the Great Seal and the Last Will, a mainstream historical fact that will have a lasting impact on English history. You find yourself observing the royal lawyers and scribes, men who are tasked with transcribing the final wishes of a king whose mind is failing him. This is a story of political manipulation and legal chicanery, a final ruthless act of a dying court. The king's will is, in a sense, the most important document of his entire reign. It will not only name his heir, but it will also establish the Regency Council that will rule in the young Prince Edward's name until he comes of age. For the Seymours and their allies, the will is a tool to secure their power and ensure a Protestant future for England. For the remnants of the Conservative faction, it is a final chance to protect their interests and their faith. The will, you realise, is not just a legal document, it is a battleground for the future of the kingdom. The creation of the will is a masterclass in political manipulation. The king, in his drugged stupor and his moments of deep confusion, is barely aware of what is happening. The lawyers and scribes, under the careful guidance of the Seymours, are transcribing a document that is not so much the king's will as it is their own. They are making subtle but crucial changes, inserting names of their own allies into the Regency Council, and ensuring that the most powerful positions are filled by men who are loyal to their cause. The king, in his pain and his confusion, is just a signature, a final ceremonial seal on a document that will effectively end his own reign. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the fact that the king's will was not actually signed by the king himself. In his final days, he was so ill and so incapacitated that he was unable to hold a pen. The will was signed with a dry stamp, a kind of royal signature stamp that was used for official documents. The use of the dry stamp, a powerful symbol of the king's authority, was a crucial part of the Seymours' plan. They could use the stamp to sign any document they wanted, and they could claim that they had the king's authority to do so. The king in his bedchamber was a man who had lost control of his own signature, a final, pathetic humiliation for a man who had always been so obsessed with his own power. Historians still argue whether the king's will was a valid document, or if it was a forgery created by the Seymours. The fact that the will was changed in the final hours of the king's life, and that the names of the councillors were altered, suggests a deep level of political manoeuvring. Some historians argue that the will was a genuine reflection of the king's wishes, and that he had, in his final days, come to believe that the Seymours were the best people to lead the kingdom. Others argue that the will was a complete fabrication, a ruthless and audacious act of treason. Given the brutal realities of Tudor politics, the truth, you realise, is likely somewhere in the middle. The Seymours did not have to forge the will. They simply had to manipulate a dying man who was too ill and too incoherent to resist. The will, with its carefully chosen names and its subtle political language, is a powerful symbol of the end of an era. The king, who had spent his entire life demanding absolute power, is now a man who is powerless against the men who serve him. His final will is not a document of his own creation, it is a document of his own destruction. The Great Seal, once a symbol of the king's absolute authority, is now a tool of the Seymours, a final, ceremonial rubber stamp on a document that will secure their power and their legacy. The court's reaction to the creation of the will is a telling sign of their changing loyalties. The Seymours' allies are overjoyed, knowing that their path to power is now clear. The Conservatives, what is left of them, are terrified. They know that the will is a death blow to their cause, and they know that the Seymours will show them no mercy. The palace, once a world of feasting and jousting, is now a world of fear and paranoia. The king's will is not a source of stability, but a source of chaos, a document that will set off a new and more brutal phase of the power struggle. The king, in his bedchamber, is utterly oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. He's a man who has lost control of his own body and his own mind, and now he has lost control of his own kingdom. The power he once held, the power he so ruthlessly fought to maintain, has been siphoned away, flowing into the hands of the very men who served him. The Great Seal and the Last Will are a powerful symbol of the end of an era, a final, ruthless testament to the fact that in the world of politics, a king is only as powerful as the men who serve him. The king's final weeks are not just a story of a man's death, they're a story of a great and ruthless power transfer, a quiet coup that will change the course of English history forever. The political machinations surrounding the king's will and the public spectacle of his final portraits are now drawing to a close. The great drama of his reign is entering its final, most intimate act. The air in the palace is not just thick with decay and ambition, it is now charged with a quiet, palpable anticipation. The court, and indeed the entire kingdom, is holding its breath, waiting for the final moment. This is the quiet passing of a titan, a moment that, for all its public importance, is surprisingly private and undramatic. You find yourself in the royal bedchamber, a silent witness to a moment that will change the course of history forever. The last hours of Henry's life are a mainstream historical fact, but they are often shrouded in myth and legend. The reality, as you see it, is far more mundane and pathetic. The king is no longer a powerful monarch. He's just a man, sick and in pain, his body failing him with every shallow breath. His face is a mask of exhaustion, his eyes are often closed, and his breathing is a shallow, rattling sound that fills the silence of the room. The doctors, including Dr. Butts, are in attendance, but they are no longer trying to cure him. They are simply there to ease his passing, to administer the last of their opiates and their herbal remedies, and to wait for the inevitable. The Queen, Catherine Parr, is also there, her face a picture of quiet grief and concern. She's the last anchor in a world that is now adrift, a final, reassuring presence in a room full of fear and anxiety. The king's final words are a subject of much debate. Some historians believe he was lucid enough to speak his final wishes, while others believe he was in an opium-induced stupor and was unable to speak coherently. The truth, you realise, is likely a combination of both. In his final moments, you see a flash of lucidity in his eyes. He will sometimes look at the people around him, a look of profound recognition on his face. He is a man who is coming to the end of a long and tumultuous life, and he is trying to make sense of it all. He will sometimes speak in a whisper, his words too soft to be heard, and he will sometimes cry out in pain, his voice a pathetic echo of the lion's roar that once shook the kingdom. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this time is the ritual of the last rites, a religious ceremony that was performed for the dying. The king, in his final moments, would have been attended by a priest who would administer the sacrament of extreme unction and hear his final confession. The Seymours and their Protestant allies would have been keen to ensure that this was a good Protestant service, a final, public declaration of the king's faith. The Conservatives, of course, would have been hoping for a different kind of service, a more traditional Catholic ceremony. The king's final rites, you realise, are a final battleground for the soul of England, a battle that is being fought in the quiet, candlelit rooms of the royal bedchamber. Historians still argue whether the king died in a state of grace or in a state of mortal sin. The Protestant historians would argue that he died a good Protestant, a man who had freed the kingdom from the tyranny of the Pope. The Catholic historians would argue that he died a man consumed by guilt, a man who was now facing the terrible judgment of God. The truth, you realise, is that no one will ever know. The king's final moments were a private matter between him and his God, and all the political machinations in the world could not change that. He was a man who lived a life of immense cruelty and immense power, and he was now facing the final, terrifying reckoning of his own conscience. The moment of death itself is a surprisingly quiet and private affair. There are no trumpets, no drum rolls, no great public announcements. There is just the shallow, rattling breath of a dying man, and then a profound, deafening silence. The king's body, which had been a source of such immense power and such immense pain, is now just a corpse, a lifeless mass of flesh. The silence in the room is a physical presence, a moment of profound shock and a moment of profound relief. The men and women who had been holding their breath for months now let it out in a great, collective sigh. The king is dead. Long live the king. The immediate aftermath of his death is a flurry of activity. The doctors and the priests are quickly ushered out of the room, the body is carefully attended to, and the Queen, Catherine Parr, is led away. The Privy Council, which had been waiting in a nearby room, now springs into action. Their quiet, clandestine meetings are now the centre of a new and more public kind of power. They are now the rulers of England, and their first act is to secure the succession of the young Prince Edward. The death of the king, you realise, is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a new and more brutal chapter. The quiet passing of the Titan is a powerful and poignant moment. A man who had lived his life as a great public figure, a man who had reshaped the very course of his kingdom, is now dying alone, surrounded by a few frightened courtiers and a handful of doctors. His death is a private matter, but its consequences are a public one. The king is dead, and the world he created is now up for grabs. The silence that follows his last breath is not a silence of sorrow, but a silence of anticipation, a silence that is filled with the hopes and fears of a kingdom that is now facing an uncertain and terrifying future. The rotting stench of his leg, which had been a constant companion, now seems to fade away, replaced by the crisp new scent of a new reign. The king is dead, and a new era is about to begin. The silence that follows the king's last breath is a profound, deafening thing. It is the sound of an era ending, the quiet sigh of a kingdom that has been holding its breath for months. But this silence is short-lived. It is quickly broken by a flurry of activity, a meticulously planned series of actions that were set in motion the moment the king's life finally ebbed away. This is the great unveiling, a public spectacle that will announce the king's death to the world and immediately begin the process of reframing his legacy. You are a witness to the final, carefully choreographed performance of a court that is now in complete control. The first order of business is to secure the succession. The Privy Council, which had been waiting in a nearby room, now takes centre stage. Their power, once a clandestine and fragile thing, is now absolute. They have the king's will, a document that they have carefully crafted and manipulated to their own ends. Their first act is to bring the young Prince Edward, a boy of 9 years, to their chamber. He is now King Edward VI, and the men who had been plotting and scheming in the shadows are now his official regents. They are now the rulers of England, and their first act is to ensure that their power is not challenged. The prince, in a state of shock and grief, is now the public face of a power that he does not yet understand. The official announcement of the king's death is a masterpiece of political theatre. It is a mainstream historical fact that the king's death was kept secret for several days. This was not out of a desire for privacy, but out of a need for control. The Privy Council needed time to consolidate their power, to inform the key players of their new roles and to prepare the public for the news. The official announcement, when it finally comes, is a carefully crafted document that praises the late king's reign and reassures the public that the succession is a smooth and peaceful one. There are no mentions of his debilitating ailments, his unpredictable temper, or the chaos that had been brewing in the court. The king, in death, is now a symbol of strength and stability, a man who died a peaceful death and left a clear and unambiguous line of succession. The legacy of his final weeks, with its stench of decay and its political machinations, is now a carefully guarded secret. The reframing of Henry's legacy is the final, most crucial act of the great unveiling. The men who now rule in his name have a vested interest in portraying him in a certain light. The Seymours and their Protestant allies want to paint him as a great reformer, a man who broke with the tyranny of the Pope and created a new, more godly church. They will praise his vision and his courage, and they will conveniently forget his cruelty and his personal failings. The Conservatives, what is left of them, will try to paint a different picture. They will speak of his love for the old traditions and his secret desire to return to the Catholic faith. They will use the rumours of his deathbed confession to sow doubt and division, a final, desperate attempt to win the battle for the soul of England. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the fact that the king's body was a source of some consternation for the new regime. The king's body, which had been a source of such immense shame and disgust in his final weeks, now had to be a source of immense public dignity. The embalmers, in their gruesome task, had to not only preserve the body but also make it presentable for the lying in state. The rotting leg had to be carefully treated and disguised, and the body had to be dressed in the finest royal robes. The king's physical decay, which had been a public spectacle in his life, was now a public secret in his death. The body, in death, was as much a political tool as it had been in life. Historians still argue whether Henry VIII's legacy was a net positive or a net negative for England. Was he a great king who, despite his personal failings, created a new and powerful nation? Or was he a brutal and ruthless tyrant who tore the kingdom apart with his religious and personal whims? The answer, you realise, is a complex one. He was a man who was both a creator and a destroyer, a man who was both a hero and a monster. His legacy is not a single, monolithic thing. It is a tapestry of contradictions, a testament to a life that was lived with immense passion and immense cruelty. The men who now rule in his name will try to simplify that legacy, to create a story that serves their own political needs. But the truth, you realise, is far more complex and far more interesting. The aftermath of his death is a time of both public mourning and private celebration. The public, who had loved and feared him in equal measure, will mourn the loss of a king who, for all his faults, was a powerful and constant presence in their lives. The courtiers, who had been living in a constant state of fear, will breathe a collective sigh of relief. The young prince, a boy of 9 years, is now the king, and a new era, with its own hopes, its own fears, and its own ruthless machinations, is about to begin. This is the end of the story, not just of a king, but of an era. The rotting stench of his final weeks is now a distant memory, replaced by the crisp, new scent of a new reign. The king is dead, and the world he created is now up for grabs. The silence that follows his last breath is not a silence of sorrow, but a silence of anticipation, a silence that is filled with the hopes and fears of a kingdom that is now facing an uncertain and terrifying future. His death, which for so long was a source of immense fear, is now a source of immense opportunity. The great Titan is gone, and the world he leaves behind will never be the same. The end of his life is the beginning of a new and more brutal chapter in the story of England. The night is finally drawing to a close. The candles in the royal bedchamber have been snuffed out, and the ghosts of Henry's past have receded into the shadows. The air is no longer thick with the stench of decay or the heavy weight of courtly intrigue. The silence is finally a true silence, a peaceful, calming quiet that washes over you. You can finally rest now, the drama of the king's final weeks a distant echo in your mind. The story is over, and the curtain has fallen on the reign of King Henry VIII. You can sleep now, a new chapter of history waiting for you when you wake. Let the quiet of the night carry you away, and may your dreams be peaceful and filled with the gentle hum of a new day.